What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Martian MMA podcast. I am your host, and my name is John, and we are back with episode 61 of the podcast. And this week, we will be analyzing and predicting the UFC on ESPN Plus 10 card, headlined by Rafael dos Anjos versus Kevin Lee. These fights will be taking place in Rochester, New York, and there will be 13 fights kicking off at 5 p.m. Eastern Times, all on ESPN Plus. At the end of the podcast, we will be quickly recapping the UFC 237 pay-per-view that happened in Rio de Janeiro this past weekend. But starting things off, we got ourselves a pretty good 13-fight card going down from Rochester, New York. You know, at first glance, this card looked pretty weak, like some of the fight night cards do. But once you study all the fights and you look into the matchups, you realize that there's a lot of good fights on the card. Should be some close fights, a couple of rematches, and a pretty interesting main event with Kevin Lee moving up to 170 to take on the veteran former champion Rafael dos Anjos. So I'm looking forward to breaking down all 13 fights, but starting things off in the featherweight division, we have Julio Arce, who is 15-3, taking on Julian Erosa, who is 22-7. Now, the opening betting line for this one was Arce at minus 400 to Erosa at plus 280. But looking over at our affiliated sportsbook, 5dimes.eu, we are seeing Julio Arce at minus 730 to Erosa at plus 515. So a lot more action coming in on the favorite Julio Arce's way, and rightfully so. You know, Arce has looked very impressive in the UFC so far, despite losing his last fight to Herman Moraes. A very good fighter in Moraes, was able to, just best him that night. It was a close split decision officially, but I have Moraes winning that fight 3-0. Arce was dropped 2 times in that fight with some powerful right hands by Moraes, but I don't think we have to be worried about that in this matchup with Erosa. Erosa's his striking is not too impressive. His offensive striking isn't terrible, but his defensive striking is very bad. He has a pretty bad chin. He's been knocked out, once a year for the past 4 years. He leans his head in exchanges, and he keeps his hands very low, and he doesn't really move his head a lot, so he gets hit a lot. And, he got knocked out by Devontae Smith not that long ago. And in his most recent fight against Grant Dawson, he lost that fight very decisively too. Now, he was taken down in that fight, nonstop. He was able to get up in that fight a few times and, create some distance from and scramble back to his feet, but he was, just bested by Dawson. He was one step behind that entire fight. He did show some good sub defense in that fight. But that's about it for Erosa. He has some nice kicks as well. Those are what he does well. But his boxing is not really too much of a threat. So on the feet, I think Arce will have a big advantage with his boxing. He's got a really nice jab and just a solid boxing and pretty solid defense as well. And he can also mix up the fight with the wrestling and take the fight to the floor and get a submission. Now, I don't think he will go for the submission in this one because Erosa showed some good sub defense versus Dawson last fight. So I think that this fight will be contested mostly on the feet, and I just think that Arce will have a big advantage on the feet. He should win by 30-27. He might even finish Julian Erosa along the way, but I think that Arce is more of like a volume puncher, honestly, and I think that I think this is his 4th fight in the UFC. He might be a little worried about losing that contract if he loses this fight, so I expect him to play it safe and win a 30-27 decision. Next fight is in the middleweight division. We got Trevin Giles, who is undefeated at 11-0, taking on Zach Cummings, who is 22-6. Now, the opening betting line for this one was Trevin Giles at minus 135 to Zach Cummings at minus 105. And right now, looking over at 5 dimes, we see Giles at minus 160 to Cummings at plus 140. So more action coming in Trevin Giles' way. I agree with the line movement in this fight as well. I've been pretty impressed with Trevin Giles, honestly. I had not honestly heard of him up until this week. He has not fought in 18 months. His last fight was in December of 2017. That last fight against Braga Neto, he looked really good. He lost the first round of that fight. he was taken down in that fight, and kind of just held on his back for a little bit, but he stayed solid defensively against a really dangerous jiu-jitsu guy, and then was landing some really good punches on the feet. Even in the first round of the fight, the round that he lost, he was landing some good punches, had a really nice jab going. And then in the rounds 2 and 3 of that fight, Giles just put an absolute beat down on Braggadinetto. He was just absolutely mauled with punches for 7-8 minutes straight, and eventually got the finish in round 3 of that fight. But Giles looked really good in that fight, and in his fight before that, his second UFC fight against James Bocanovic, that was actually his debut. He was able to double leg take down Bocanovic in that fight, avoid all of Bocanovic's subs off of his back. He was able to pass the guard and, pretty much just smash him with ground and pound from then on. He had really good top pressure. Every time Bocanovic tried to get up to his feet, Giles would slam him back down, and he eventually did get the ground and pound finish in the second round of that fight. So Giles has looked good on the feet, and he's looked good on the ground as well. He's definitely got a good wrestling base. He's got good top pressure, good sub defense, and was really impressed with his boxing against Braggadinetto in last fight. But that guy was pretty much a zombie on the feet. He wasn't really throwing back too much, and I think that Zach Cummings is a much better MMA fighter than Braggadinetto. So moving on to his opponent, Zach Cummings, he moved up to 85 in his last fight. That fight was against Trevor Smith. He did win that fight via decision, but man, I thought Cummings looked pretty bad in that fight, man. He moved up to 85, and he looked slow. He looked soft. He did not look very muscular. He had a lot of extra weight on him, it looked like. And he wasn't moving his head well. He was getting hit with some punches. He does do a few things well. He has a nice leg kick. He has decent boxing fundamentals, but he's just not quick anymore. It's hard to avoid the punches, and he throws telegraph punches because they're coming from a mile away. He was actually getting hit with a good amount of shots from Trevor Smith in that fight. So that was pretty worrisome performance, although he did get the win in that one. He dropped Smith with a punch in round 3. That was the best moment of the fight. So he did dig deep and have a big moment in round 3. But he still lost the position right away. He knocked him down, and then he lost the position. He let Smith get on top, and it happened again later in that fight. Cummings tried to take Smith's back, and he slipped right off, and then Smith got on top. So Cummings really couldn't control that fight. He did not have good killer instinct. Did not have much finishing ability. He looked slow. His takedowns looked telegraphed. I think that Giles is going to be way faster on the feet. He's going to be able to stuff the takedowns, maybe even hit his own takedowns, honestly. So I think that we could be looking at a Trevin Giles finish in this one. If not, I expect him to win the decision pretty decisively. Probably 30-27, maybe even get a 10-8 round in there. So the pick is going to be Trevor Giles. Next fight is taking place in the light heavyweight division. We have Patrick Cummins, who is 10-6, taking on Ed Herman, who is 22-4. The opening betting line for this one was Cummins minus 265 to Ed Herman at plus 185. Right now, over on 5 Dimes, we are seeing Patrick Cummins minus 255 to Ed Herman at plus 215. So not much line movement in this one. There's probably two-way action coming in on this fight. And honestly, I'm going to disagree at where the line is at right now. I think it's way too wide. Patrick Cummins is, a very low-level fighter. He's looked pretty bad lately. He got he was supposed to be a grappler. He was supposed to be a wrestler, In his past 2 fights, he got, out-wrestled and tapped out by Misha Serkunov. And he got, just absolutely wrestle-fucked by Corey Anderson in the fight before that. So he had a really rough 2018. He did pick up a couple wins in 2017 over Blachowicz and Vellante. But I thought Vellante won that fight, and I thought the Blachowicz fight was a draw. So, I thought both of those fights were scored incorrectly. So you could really say that Cummins hasn't had a really good win in his past 6 fights. And in the fight before that, he against Cavalcante, he was losing that fight, the whole fight, and then he ended up getting the finish in round 3. So, Cummins has always started slow. He looked bad against Anderson, man. He looked before Anderson even landed a punch. Cummins looked slow. His shots were telegraphed. You could see his punches coming from a mile away. His striking is no good. He's super hittable on the feet. His face is really easily cut open. Every single fight Cummins leaves the octagon bruised, battered, bloodied, all of it, man. And that makes it really easy for the judges to score. When you see one guy, if the fight's close and one guy's face is chewed up and all bloody, you might score the round for his opponent. So, he leads with his head. He's constantly rushing forward, but his head is the first thing that's coming at you. He's got no footwork. Cummins' striking has just always been really, really bad. So, and even his wrestling nowadays, the last time he was able to wrestle successfully in his fight was against John Vellante, and Vellante was able to stuff a couple takedowns before Cummins got him. Vellante stuffed the first 3 takedowns, and then Cummins finally got Vellante down the 4th time, but he still couldn't keep him down. And that was, both those guys, gassed out pretty hard in that fight. It was a sloppy fight, just like all Cummins fights are. And, Herman had a pretty sloppy fight against Vellante too, so I'm not totally bashing Cummins here. Herman is not nowhere near a high-level opponent either. He's actually pretty low-skilled at this point in his career. Pretty much only boxing is what Ed Herman is going to do. He'll throw the occasional leg kick out there, but offensively, he does not do anything really but box and leg kick. But, the last fight against Vellante, I was sort of impressed with Herman. He looked pretty decent in that fight. He was coming off a long layoff in that fight. Almost a 18-month layoff, and that was coming off of a loss to CB Dalloway, where he was, just taken down relentlessly in that fight. He didn't look too good in that fight. Couldn't get off his back in the latter rounds, and lost the decision decisively. But he came back against Vellante, and he looked competitive in that fight. His boxing looked decent. He has good fundamentals. They're still there. His chin looked pretty good. He was getting hit with some big shots, and he was not really flinching at all. He was just kept coming forward. So I think that Cummins has a chance to get the wrestling going. Both these guys are very old veterans at the end of their careers. So, and Herman has not really shown good takedown defense. So Cummins could get Herman down. But I honestly don't trust Cummins' athleticism at this point to get the takedown. Maybe he'll get him down in round 1. But after that, man, I think Cummins is done cardio-wise. I don't think he has the cardio to wrestle 3 rounds. I think that the rounds 2 and 3 will be contested on the feet, and I think that Herman will probably win those 2 rounds. He would just outbox him to a decision, quite frankly. So, this fight is pretty low level. It's pretty unpredictable, but the way I see it going is, like I just described, Cummins getting the takedown in round 1. Maybe edging round 1 to Cummins, and then round 2, Herman starts stuffing the takedowns and just, outboxing Cummins to a 2-1 decision. So that's going to be the pick. I think there's a little bit of value on the dog here in Ed Herman, and I think that let's see what Herman by decision is. That could be a little bit of value too. Herman by decision plus 570, man, value all over that. So even fight goes to decision minus 145. Honestly, I think that's pretty safe. Both of these guys are tough. Both of them have very little finishing ability. The fight goes to decision line is definitely value. At minus 145, yeah. I'm gonna have to bet on that right after the podcast. But you got the pick for that one. We're moving on to the featherweight fight. We got Mike Trizano 8-0 taking on Grant Dawson, who is 13-1. The opening betting line for this one was Mike Trizano as the minus 135 favorite to Grant Dawson at minus 105. Right now we are seeing over on 5 Dimes, Grant Dawson is the underdog at plus 110 to Trizano as the favorite at minus 130. So more action coming in Trizano's way. There's definitely two-way action coming on this fight. It's a really close fight. Personally, I think it's my favorite fight on the card. I think we're in for a treat in the grappling aspect of things. I think both of these guys have very solid ground games. Trizano has a really good defensive ground game, and Dawson has a really good offensive ground game. So I think that this one will be mostly contested in the grappling aspect of things. Although I expected there to be portions on the feet as well. So. Starting things off with Trizano, he will be dropping down to featherweight for this fight. He's a former lightweight. He won the Ultimate Fighter at lightweight. But his opponent, who he beat in the finale, he beat Giannetti, who didn't get signed to the UFC somehow. That's a real disservice, man. Joe Giannetti is a good fighter and good guy. He's a real cool dude on Twitter, and the UFC didn't sign him, although he was a good fighter and had a close competitive fight with Trizano in the finale. But Trizano, he trains at Tiger Schulman's with, Julio Arce, with Shane Burgos, with Jimmy Rivera, with a lot of high-level UFC talent. So he's got really good training partners. Interesting that he chooses to drop down to featherweight, though, with two of the three guys who I just mentioned being at featherweight. Julio Arce and Shane Burgos, two of his good friends and training partners, are in the division. So that's kind of interesting. But regardless, Trizano picked up the win against Pena and against Giannetti, both split decisions. I thought, they weren't really split decisions. I thought Trizano won both of those fights. He did show a little bit of weakness in those fights, though. He was taken down by Pena and by Giannetti. He did do a good job, getting back to his feet and reversing the position and, maybe hitting an offensive takedown of his own on both gentlemen. I think he was taken down and he took down both of those opponents who I just mentioned. You'll hear people talk shit on Trizano saying that he got taken down by John Gunther and he got controlled by John Gunther. Man, that is so overstated. John Gunther did take Trizano down, but he really just held on to Trizano for a minute, maybe 90 seconds at most. Didn't pass guard, didn't really land any solid ground and pound, and then Trizano got back up to his feet. So every time that Gunther tried advancing position, he left enough space for Trizano to get back to his feet, and that's what the same thing Giannetti did, same thing with Pena. Trizano's got a real good get-up game, real solid defensive grappling, and I think that his striking will be much better than Grant Dawson's in this matchup. I think that Trizano has a real good inside leg kick. He was firing that thing from the jump against Pena. He landed 15, 20 solid inside leg kicks in that fight, just going to the well with it. And Trizano's also got some solid boxing too. He was counter punching real nice against Pena. Pena was throwing those big, overextended shots, and Trizano was slipping and countering really well in that fight. Trizano put on a really good performance against Pena, who was overhyped himself, but regardless, it was still a good win. Now getting over to Grant Dawson, the way I was talking, you can probably tell that I am favoring Trizano a little bit, but Grant Dawson is a legitimate fighter and has a real solid chance to win this fight. Grant Dawson is, he's going to be looking for takedowns out here. He has a real vast array of takedowns. He has good chain wrestling. He'll attack. That's the biggest thing with wrestling. Guys can have good takedowns. They can be good wrestlers, but can they chain them together? Because, everyone's got takedown defense nowadays. You're not going to get a guy down with a double leg as easily as you were anymore. You got to hit that double leg, then transition to a single, then go to that outside trip. And Grant Dawson does that really, really well. And his ground game, once he gets on the ground, is pretty solid too. He's got good ground and pound. He's always looking for, submissions. But, the one thing he's not looking for is top position, is keeping his opponent down. I think that's actually a pretty big weakness for him. He expands a lot of energy getting those takedowns and chaining together that wrestling. But once he gets his opponents down, he gets a little excited. He looks for that big ground and pound shot. He looks to submit his opponents. But he loses position sometimes, and you saw that in the Julian Erosa fight. Julian Erosa is a low-level opponent, also on this card facing Julio Arce, and Erosa was able to get back to his feet 5 times in that fight. And then Dawson looked like he was feeling it in round 3. He looked a little tired in round 3 of that fight, and he let Erosa hit him with some punches all throughout that fight. And Erosa is, like I said, not that good of an opponent. So, even though he did win that fight 30-27, in my opinion, Grant Dawson did, he showed a lot of weaknesses in that fight. I think he actually showed more weaknesses than strengths in that fight. I thought that, Grant Dawson, his previous wins looked a lot better than the win over Julian Erosa. He has had some. The only loss of his career actually came by elbows to the back of the head while he was getting going for that takedown. But his previous wins have looked really good. This Tuesday Night Contender Series win was good, and. It's a shame he didn't really get to show all of his skills in that Erosa fight. But so getting down to how this matchup will play out, I think it's going to be really, really close. I think that Dawson will get Trizano down to the mat, but I think Trizano's going to get up. I think that it's going to come down to who's going to have the better cardio and who can dig deep in round 3. I see Dawson probably getting maybe 2-3 takedowns in round 1, that being enough for him to get the round 1 in the judges' scorecards. I see Trizano starting to stuff more takedowns and land more punches in round 2, and I think that Trizano will win round 2. Now, round 3, like I said, both guys are going to have to dig deep into that gas tank, and I think that Trizano has the better gas tank. I think that the round 3 will be more contested on the feet, and I think that Trizano will be outstriking Grant Dawson in round 3, and he will probably win this decision 29-28, probably a split decision for either type of guy. It's going to be close, man. It really depends on how well Trizano can bounce back up from those takedowns, because I think that Dawson will get Trizano down. It's just a matter of maybe Grant Dawson will focus more on top position this fight and try to keep Trizano down, and just instead of chasing that ground and pound, instead of chasing that submission, just staying solid on top, and just getting whatever opportunity comes to you, whether it's ground and pound or submission. I think that Dawson will win the fight if he focuses on top position. But if he gets overzealous and looks for that ground and pound, looks for those submission over position, then I think that he'll leave enough space for Trizano to get up, and that'll be enough for Trizano to win some striking exchanges and win the fight on the scorecard. So I think this fight will go to the decision, probably 7 times out of 10 if they fought. I really don't. Maybe, Trizano knocks him out one of the times. Maybe a couple of the guys submit each other one of the times. But I think this fight will go to the scorecard. So the fight goes the distance prop seems to be the play on this one if you're having trouble picking a side. So the next fight is in the welterweight division. We got Michel Pereira taking on Danny Roberts. Pereira is 22-9. Danny Roberts is 16-4. The opening betting line for this one was Danny Roberts, the minus 210 favorite, to Pereira plus 160. Right now we are seeing over on 5 dimes. Roberts minus 255 to Pereira at plus 215. So, Michel Pereira making his UFC debut in this one. You might know him from that viral YouTube video. I forget. Let me figure out what this video was called. It was so ridiculous. He's fighting a chubby Asian guy. This guy, it's a 5'8" Asian guy versus a 6'2", huge Brazilian guy. It's just like a freak show fight, it's an open weight fight. The guys, they didn't have a weight limit. That's so rare nowadays. And you see Pereira in that fight, backflipping off the cage and doing all these crazy techniques that really aren't even like MMA techniques. This dude is just straight up thinking of his own shit out there. So he, it's interesting. I'm pretty sure that clip was the one that got him signed. It is his most recent fight. It had to have played into the UFC's signing of this guy. The video is called MMA Thug Life Craziest Moves in the World. It's got 6 million views on YouTube, and there is no doubt that is why Michel Pereira got signed to the UFC. Now, he's a freak of an athlete. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be here, because I think that there are a lot lower level guys in the roster, but he's definitely on the lower spectrum of the roster. He's pretty much just a power striker. He doesn't really have much besides that. He's really explosive, and he's got good knees. It looks like he's got a good understanding of Muay Thai. He'll tie you up in the clinch and just smash you with knees to the chest and to the face. That's actually how he really won that last fight against the Korean gentleman who I'm forgetting his name. Let's see. Dae-Sung Kim. That's how he eventually finished him with knees. But, Pereira has shown his weaknesses. He fought a guy named Dusko Todorovic, who was much smaller than him. And this was only 6 months ago. This was December 1st, 2018. And Dusko was able to knock Pereira out in that fight. And Pereira looked weak in that fight. He didn't show us necessarily a bad chin. It looked like he just got hit with some punches, and he looked like he wanted out of there. It looked like he knew the fight wasn't going his way. He got hit with a shot or two, and he covered up, and he quit in that one. So, when the fight starts going bad for Pereira, look for him to look for a way out. Now, he's facing Danny Roberts in this fight, who is, one of the lowest IQ fighters on the roster. I was on Roberts in his last fight. It was such a winnable fight for him. I had the game plan, mapped out to a T. But he just couldn't execute anything. He had Claudio Silva hurt and out of there 3 separate times in that fight. But this idiot chose to go to the ground with one of the best jiu-jitsu guys, on the roster. It was just such a bonehead move, just over and over and again by Roberts in that fight. He made so many mistakes in that fight. And then it eventually ended with that controversial submission. It would just, what an awful performance by Roberts in that fight. The fact that he lost to that bum Claudio Silva. Claudio Silva's a great grappler. He's great at submissions. But in terms of an MMA fighter, he's god awful. He has no striking, no wrestling, just desperately looks for a submission, and Roberts gave it to him in that fight. Now, Roberts is a good striker. He's a former pro boxer. He's got really good power in his hands. But and he also has decent submissions off his back. He pulled off a triangle on Nathan Coy one time. But he's, like I said, just makes low IQ level decisions in all of his fights, man. So I fully expect him to go out here striking with Pereira. I think that he has a great chance of getting clipped, honestly. I think that Pereira could win by knockout in round 1, or that's it, But he has a good chance. I honestly think that round 1 is 50-50. I think that Pereira has a great chance at hitting that chin of Roberts and, knocking him out in round 1. But if it goes past round 1, I heavily favor Roberts. I think that Pereira will start looking for a way out in rounds 2 or 3, and Roberts will get the finish in rounds 2 or 3. But Pereira is going to be dangerous in that first round, and I think the Pereira money line, 215, that has some value. I think Pereira's TKO line, Pereira round 1, all that has value. So I'm honestly going to go with picking Pereira in this one. Maybe it's just because I'm so frustrated with Roberts about his last fight that I'm picking him to lose this one. But I honestly think that Pereira has a good chance at touching that chin of Roberts. Roberts just fights so dumb. He fights to the level of his opponents, and he's going to, probably engage recklessly on the feet in round 1 and get knocked out. So the pick is going to be Pereira to pull off the upset. The next fight takes place in the lightweight division. We got Desmond Green, who is 22-8, taking on Charles Jourdain, who is 9-1. The opening betting line for this one was Des Green at -260 to Jourdain at +180. Right now, over on 5 Dimes, we are seeing Des Green -650 to Charles Jourdain at +475. So I'm going to agree with the line movement in this one. I think that where that opener was set was way too low for Green. I think Green deserves to be, I wouldn't say -650. I would say he deserves to be, yeah, I guess you could say -650, sure. Charles Jourdain looks like a very skilled fighter. He is coming over from the TKO promotion in Canada, a very legitimate promotion with some good talent over there. But Jourdain does his best work at featherweight, and this fight is at lightweight. And, although Desmond Green isn't the biggest lightweight in the world, I think that this matchup is just going to be a nightmare for Jourdain. I'll get into Jourdain first. He has good striking. He's got good leg kicks, good boxing and power. He's, knocked people out. He can fight from both stances. He has flashy finishes. He drops his opponents with spinning back fists and, finished him off with a guillotine. But he has a clear weakness, and that is getting taken down and held down. He got his loss against Laramie. He was taken down for pretty much all 5 rounds of that fight. I think that's one of his only loss, if I'm correct, is to T.J. Laramie. Yeah, and that was in December of 2017. Just all 5 rounds was just taken down, spending time off his back. Couldn't get up. Couldn't stuff a takedown. Looked like he didn't have much wrestling at all. And that's where the nightmare sets in for this matchup, because he's taking on Des Green, who is, I think, an All-American wrestler. He's got real solid wrestling, good timing, good blast, double leg takedown. He's also got some pretty solid striking as well. So the closest aspect of this fight should be on the feet. Green isn't the greatest striker. He's a little low volume. He has been outstruck in the past by most recently Mairbek Taisimov. But he's got a solid boxing. He's got a nice left hand. He's got some good leg kicks. But it's just he mixes up the takedowns really, really well. And you saw that most recently against Ross Pearson. He was touching Ross Pearson on the feet, and then he blasted that double leg, and he didn't mess around at all. He just went straight to the ground and pound, and he knocked Ross Pearson out with some ground and pound against the cage. You're just right off the takedown. It was a really aggressive finish, something we haven't seen from Desmond Green really too much in the octagon. I think that was his first finish in the UFC. So Desmond Green, he definitely turned it up last fight. And Jourdain has a chance at clipping Desmond Green on the feet. That's a very small chance, and that his TKO line at plus 1365 is definitely a good value stab for this fight. But honestly, 9 times out of 10, I think that Desmond Green gets the takedown. I think that he is able to either get the ground and pound and finish Jourdain like he did Ross Pearson, maybe snatch a submission up, or possibly just ride out a decision, a decisive decision, because Jourdain really can't get off his back. I have not seen him get off his back, really at all. And it's a shame that, because I was impressed with Jourdain on his TKO fights. I was really enjoying them. Man, that fight against whatever one he hit the guillotine, Alex Morgan, that's it. He hit a spinning back fist and he guillotined this guy, which is such an impressive finish, man. I want to see this guy at featherweight. So I don't know if this was I think this was maybe a short notice fill-in fight for Jourdain. He's coming in, got the opportunity to come into the UFC, and he took the opportunity. But I hope he drops down to featherweight and has a good career. But I think he's going to be taking the loss in this one, probably by decisive decision, 30-27 for Desmond Green. The next fight takes place in the women's bantamweight division. We have Aspen Ladd, who is undefeated at 7-0, taking on Sijara Eubanks, who is 4-2. The opening betting line for this one was Aspen Ladd as the minus 305 favorite to Eubanks at plus 225. Right now, over on 5 Dimes, we are seeing Aspen Ladd minus 310 to Sijara Eubanks at plus 255. Now, when I initially saw this line for the first time, I thought it was a little wide. I thought that Sijara Eubanks has looked pretty good lately, although Aspen Ladd has as well. But then, looking at the records, I realized that they fought before, and it wasn't even that long ago. This is a rematch that took place in Invicta FC, the women's only promotion, and that fight was only in 2017. It was January 14th, 2017, so a little over 2 years since that fight happened. And we'll talk about we'll summarize the first fight before we talk about how this matchup plays out and how we think that who I think has improved more. So the first fight, it was Ladd was landing the better punches on the feet. She was pressuring Eubanks, but Eubanks was landing the better kicks. Eubanks didn't look like she had a good understanding of boxing yet, but her kicks were on point. So Eubanks was looking for the takedown, And Aspen Ladd was able to stuff one takedown, but Eubanks was able to get her down at on the second takedown at the end of the round 1. But Ladd got back to her feet, and I still gave Aspen Ladd the first round. She was landing the better punches. She was throwing in combinations, while Eubanks was only throwing in single shots. And, Aspen Ladd, her takedown defense stood up for the most part. I didn't really think that Eubanks was able to do much with her takedowns. Actually, Ladd was the one landing the takedowns and doing the better top control. And Ladd got a body lock takedown in round 3 of that fight. It was competitive on the ground, though. Sajara reversed the position. She ended up, on top in that fight. And it was definitely a close fight, but I gave the fight to Aspen Ladd. She did win the decision. It was pretty, I think, clearly a decision for Aspen Ladd. But since then, I think that Sajara Eubanks has looked like the better fighter. Although, and she's improved more. That's what I'm talking about. I think Aspen Ladd looked good in her 2 wins in the UFC so far against Lena Landsberg and against Tanya Evinger, but 2 low-level opponents, Evinger, a veteran, Landsberg, just a lower-level opponent. And Aspen struggled in round 1 versus Lena Landsberg. Lena Landsberg might have stole round 1 from Aspen Ladd, honestly. It was a competitive clinch battle. Landsberg is, I believe her background is in Muay Thai, so Ladd was having some trouble in the clinch with Landsberg. She wasn't able to get the takedown. Landsberg was landing some good knees in the clinch with Ladd. Ladd looked pretty uncomfortable in that Muay Thai clinch. But eventually in round 2, Aspen Ladd was able to get the takedown with a double leg and just used that shoulder presser to pass over into full mount and then just smashed Landsberg with that ground and pound from quarter guard. She was just stayed on top and just pounded her out. And that's pretty much how the fight went with Evinger too. Ladd didn't look too comfortable on the feet. Evinger was landing a few punches on the feet, and then there was a little bit of a stall against the cage. They were kind of grinding each other out against the cage, and it looked like Evinger went for a takedown or something, but it just totally failed. Ladd ended up on top. She took the back of Evinger and then was able to just, again, ground and pound TKO Evinger from the back mount. And she does this thing where she screams as she's, throwing ground and pound and, doing, these emotional primal screams. It's really weird and uncomfortable to watch. So moving on to Sajara Eubanks, she's moving back up to 135 in this fight. She's fought at 135 before. The first fight was at 135, but Sajara tried moving down to 25. Since then, she was on the Ultimate Fighter at 25. She failed to make weight for the title fight. She fought Lauren Murphy at 25, got the decision there. Fought Modafari at 25 and got the decision there. She looked much more aggressive in the Modafari fight. She looked like her boxing had improved. She was throwing combinations. She was marching forward and being aggressive. The one thing Sajara does not do too well is chain together takedowns too well. What she'll do is she'll shoot in for a takedown, and she'll get you up against the cage, and she'll hold on to your legs for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then she'll transition to a single leg or something like that. It's not like you watch high level male wrestlers. They'll hit that. They'll shoot a double and they'll transition within a second or two. And then that's how they hit the takedown. Nobody does that better than Henry Cejudo, the gold medal Olympic champion, who is also the flyweight champion. He did that against Demetrius Johnson. Pretty much better than anyone we've ever seen do in the UFC. And Eubanks just doesn't do that at all. She is really slow with transitioning in between takedowns. She would push Modafari up against the fence and then wait, and then go to a single leg. And that allowed Roxanne Modafari to be competitive in the grappling exchanges. She was using judo throws to counter the takedowns, and she actually got Eubanks on her back at the end of round 2, and Eubanks couldn't get up. She tried Kimura sweeping Roxanne, but Roxanne was able to stay on top, and Eubanks struggled with the top pressure of Modafari. So if Ladd is able to get on top in this fight, I see it being a problem. I think that Ladd's ground and pound makes it very difficult for you to use the jiu-jitsu and to try to escape the position when you're getting smashed with that violent ground and pound of Aspen Ladd. So I think that this fight will be even more competitive than the first fight. I think Eubanks has improved more than Ladd has. She's been more active. She's fought a lot better competition since the first fight. I think Eubanks in boxing has improved. I think it'll be closer on the feet. I think that Eubanks will be throwing back in combination. She will be trying to be more aggressive in this fight. She's not going to be moving back like she was in the first fight. She was not going to be, willingly putting her back to the cage and letting Aspen Ladd land the more, better shots on the feet. So if Aspen Ladd chases the offensive grappling in this fight, if she looks to get the takedown and to get the top position, I think that Ladd will win this fight. I think that she has a good chance of finishing with the ground and pound as well, like her past couple of fights. But I think it'll be competitive. I think Ladd will probably just end up on top in the scrambles. I think that Ladd will, just dictate the pace of the fight. She will be on top throughout more of the rounds. I think, but if it's on the feet, I expect it to be competitive. I think that the more it spends on the feet, I think the closer the fight will be. I think that Eubanks has might even have the better striking between the two at this point in their career, despite Ladd having the better striking the first time they met. So we've seen some rematches lately. Maurice Green versus Jeff Hughes comes to mind, where Jeff Hughes was able to decision Maurice Green the first time they fought, and then only a year later they fought again, and Maurice Green got the better of him that time. So it's certainly possible for Sijara Eubanks to pull off this upset. And where the line is at right now, I think that the value is on Sijara Eubanks, maybe Sijara Eubanks by decision as well, being value. I don't think you can lay that chalk at -310 on Aspen Ladd. Where she's at in her career at this point, especially with the competition that she's faced. So I'm actually going to lean Sijara Eubanks' way, man. I just think that she wants it more. I think that she's improved more. I think that the boxing will be closer. I'm actually going to give the striking advantage to Eubanks at this point in her career. And I think that Sijara is going to be ready for the takedown. I think she's going to be ready to reverse the position if she does get taken down and bounce back up to her feet, maybe even hit her own takedown. So I'm going to actually lean with Sijara Eubanks in this fight to pull off the victory as the +255 underdog. Moving on to the first fight on the main card of the evening. The main card kicks off on ESPN Plus at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for this one. We are starting things off in the lightweight division with Austin Hubbard, who is 10-2, taking on Davi Ramos, who is 9-2. The opening betting line for this one was Davi Ramos as the favorite at -230 to Austin Hubbard at +170. Right now, over on 5Dimes, we are seeing Davi Ramos -470 to Austin Hubbard at +375. Interesting line movement in this one. I thought it would honestly be more line movement in the way of Davi Ramos. Davi Ramos was a -1,000 favorite in his last fight against John Gunther, who actually has a decent wrestling background. Now, everyone knew that it was nowhere near good enough to compete with Davi Ramos, and his jiu-jitsu was nowhere near good enough, and that's exactly how that fight went, with Davi Ramos submitting him in 2 minutes' time. And the opponent that Ramos is fighting this time, in Austin Hubbard, does not look much better on the ground, honestly, than John Gunther did. Now, Austin Hubbard will be making his UFC debut in this one, and he's not looked like a total can, honestly. He's looked like he's had some decent skills on the feet. He's, definitely picked up some nice knockouts. His last fight was a brutal knockout from LFA. That was against Achilles Mota, but the fight before that is the one that really worries me, and his decision loss to Eric Wisely. Eric Wisely, that fight was on October 7th, 2017, only 18 months ago, and he was taken down in all 5 rounds of that fight and held down in all 5 rounds of that fight. Could barely get back to his feet, did not have much takedown defense, did not have much defensive jiu-jitsu, didn't have any sweeps or any way to get back to his feet, and he was just completely dominated bell to bell in that fight by Eric Wisely with grappling. And even in the Harvey Park fight, he had his back taken by Harvey Park, and he almost got rear naked choked in that fight. Now, he did do a good job defending the rear naked choke, but the difference between Harvey Park and Davi Ramos's jiu-jitsu is absolutely catastrophic. I throw around the term best jiu-jitsu guy on the roster a lot. Honestly, I do. It's pretty much any Brazilian with a black belt, I probably call them one of the best jiu-jitsu guys on the roster. But Davi Ramos might be, the best jiu-jitsu guy on the roster. I throw around the world champion jiu-jitsu black belt. I throw around that term a lot, But Ramos won ADCC as a black belt in 2015. ADCC is, the most prestigious no-gi grappling in the world. World competition. People from all over the world fly to Abu Dhabi to compete in that. And Davi Ramos won it only 4 years ago as a black belt. I think it was at something like I don't even know how many kilos. Maybe 170 kilo or 170 pounds. They do things in kilos over there. So I'll have to do the conversions too. I'm pretty sure it was at 76 kilograms. I'm just making shit up at this point. 77 kilograms. 77 times 2.2. 170 pounds. So he won gold grappling with 170 pounders, and now he's fighting at 155 pounds in the UFC. I think the only loss that Ramos has suffered in the UFC was a short notice fight to Sergio Moraes, who is a welterweight. He was evenly matched in the terms of the jiu-jitsu in that one. Moraes, another excellent black belt from Brazil as well. So and he was outmatched in that one in size. It was a short notice fight, and it was he was just making his way into the roster in that one. So he took the loss in that one, but since then has dropped down to lightweight, and he's picked up 3 rear naked chokes since then over Gritzmacher, Hein, and Gunther. Pretty decent competition. Nick Hein being a very good grappler of his own right. So Davi Ramos is just really good in the UFC so far. He's really powerful on the feet. He throws a lot of overhands and a lot of big kicks to close the distance. He throws a lot of kicks because he's not worried about being taken down at all. The counter to a kick is catching it or trying to take somebody down off of it. But Ramos would welcome you to do that. So Austin Hubbard, he's probably ready for the UFC. He looks like a decent fighter. It's just he bit off more than he can chew in this debut. They gave him Ramos. They fed him to the wolves in his debut. He's gonna get taken down. He's gonna get tapped out pretty shortly in this fight. And honestly, Davi Ramos at minus 470. There's still some value at minus 470. We're seeing some people Green at minus 650, Luque minus 700. So Ramos isn't even the biggest favorite on the card, and I think that he deserves to be. So the pick is going to be Ramos by submission in round 1. The next fight takes place in the lightweight division. We got Charles Oliveira, who is 26-8, taking on Nick Lentz, who is 39-2. The opening betting line for this one was Charles Oliveira as the minus 305 favorite to Nick Lentz at plus 225. Right now we are seeing Oliveira minus 355 to Nick Lentz at plus 295, so even more action coming in on the favorite Oliveira. Now, this is a trilogy fight, the third time these gentlemen have fought in the UFC nonetheless too. And the last time they fought, Oliveira won by submission in the 3rd round, to which John Anik said, Oliveira ends the rivalry here tonight. And Lord would he know that there is a 3rd fight taking place for some reason this Saturday night. Now, I guess the two gentlemen are pretty, evenly matched in the ranking aspect of things. But, I just think that there's no reason for this rematch at all. Both fights were won by Charles Oliveira. Although the first one did have a little controversy around it because Oliveira landed an illegal knee to a downed opponent that, definitely changed the course of that fight. So there's a little, stigma behind the first fight, and despite it being an official submission for Oliveira. But where they're at in this point in their career, I think it will be, this will be the closest fight of them all, honestly. I think that both of these guys are experienced veterans at this point. I think they're both kind of on the outs of their athletic careers. I think that their best years are both behind them. They're pretty similar fighters to one another, honestly. I think that Oliveira has wicked jiu-jitsu, some of the best submissions in the UFC. Best submissions. I didn't say best jiu-jitsu guy. I said best submissions, okay? Don't be coming at me for reiterating myself constantly. But Oliveira has I think 13, 14 submissions, the most submissions out of any guy in the UFC. Two of them coming over Nick Lentz already, so I think he will probably add a third one to the list tonight. Although Nick Lentz is dangerous, he's got good wrestling. His striking has got a lot better. He's got a real dangerous guillotine that he can hit from all over the place. His last fight was a real grinding type of fight against Holtzman, a lot of takedowns in that fight, but, he was getting lit up with punches on the feet in that fight by Holtzman. Holtzman clearly outstruck Lentz in that fight, and Lentz was dragging at the end of that fight. He was really, really dragging at the end of that fight. He was tired and, just desperately grabbing for a takedown and eating punches. He took a lot of damage in that fight, but he still won on the scorecards. And Oliveira in his last fight overcame some big adversity as well. Was eye poked, was viciously eye gouged, right when that fight started. Now, I've personally accused Oliveira of, maybe being a quitter at some point. Sometimes when the fight's not going his way, when the submissions aren't there, he kind of looks for a way out. He flops to his back or, all different types of ways that he looks out for fights, but he certainly did not look out for a way out in that fight. He got eye gouged early. He took the time to recover, and he came out swinging in that one. And he, had a real competitive round one, back and forth. He did get dropped by a left hand in that fight by David Tamer. He was rushing forward way too recklessly with his hands down, urging Tamer to come on, and then he got dropped with the left hand. Pretty funny sequence of events. But in round two of that fight, he landed, a nasty knee, and I think and an elbow that hurt David Tamer really bad, and he was able to swarm Tamer with some punches and eventually snatch up the anaconda choke in that one. So Oliveira's striking is still dangerous, man. He's still got really good. It was a step in upwards elbow, like the type that Donald Cerrone and Yair Rodriguez like to throw. So really wicked strike that Oliveira landed there. It rocked Tamer with the elbow and then snatched that anaconda for a beautiful finish after some really nasty adversity with getting eye poked like that. So I expect this one to be competitive. I still think Oliveira will be a step ahead. I think that it's just Oliveira has his number in the grappling department. He knows that he can tap Lentz out. He's done it twice before, and I think that he will do it a third time in this fight. And I think that Oliveira will be the better striker. I think that he has a chance at hurting Lentz on the feet, maybe even getting a TKO victory. I don't think this one will go to the scorecards. Maybe, Lentz has a chance to win. He does have a slight chance to win. I think it'll have to be by, getting his guillotine of his own or possibly hurting Oliveira with a strike on the feet and finishing him that way. But I don't think this one will go to the scorecards. Neither of the first fights have gone to the scorecards. They've both been pretty high intensity back and forth fights, so I'm expecting a good competitive fight in this one. But I think that Oliveira will get his hand raised via submission. The next fight is in the women's featherweight division. We got Megan Anderson, who is 8-3, taking on Felicia Spencer, who is undefeated at 6-0. The opening betting line for this one was Megan Anderson as the favorite at -165 to Felicia Spencer at +125. right now over on 5 Dimes, we are seeing Megan Anderson minus 175 to Felicia Spencer at plus 155. So if you're looking at it now, the line doesn't seem to have moved much, but I can tell you that's not the case. Early money came in all over Felicia Spencer, and Megan Anderson was a dog for a good point, actually. She was plus 115 at one moment earlier this week. So I'm going to say congratulations to anybody who got Megan Anderson as an underdog in this one. I think that Megan Anderson will win this fight. I think she should be the favorite. I think that Spencer has just looked a little hasn't looked too impressive. Spencer, she's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, a black belt in taekwondo, so she's got good ground game and some good crazy kicks, but her wrestling has not really impressed me. She's not looked that dominant on the ground. She fought Kolinsky, a Ukrainian woman. She was able to take her down and take her back, but Kolinsky was able to defend the rear naked choke for a minute or two. She eventually got Kolinsky down and got the rear naked choke in round 2, but it took Spencer a good amount of time to submit Kolinsky in that fight, and Kolinsky did not look like she had much grappling knowledge at all, just from the way of I saw things. Now she took Pam Sorensen down, I think that was her name. With some outside trips. She had, again, 4 minutes of back control in round 1 of that fight, but could not get the choke. So, it's not like if Spencer gets this fight to the ground, it's end all be all. Because that's where Spencer's going to be looking to take this fight. Definitely. She just really just takes the back and just holds you there and hits you with some ground and pound. But even when she's looking for the takedown, she can be sloppy. She can be desperate. Her striking is super sloppy. She's hittable on the feet. She's got bad footwork. She's not really too high level of an opponent, honestly. I've been really unimpressed with Spencer. Actually, a fun fact I read on Sherdog that all of her wins, all 6 of her the women she has defeated, have not fought since she fought Felicia Spencer. So I don't know what that says. I mean, it's maybe that they were on the outs of their career and they weren't even worthy opponents anyway. But I really have not seen anything impressive from Felicia Spencer. Anything impressive. Megan Anderson's not a world beater or anything like that, but I've definitely seen a lot more positive with her. She's got really good striking, some really powerful kicks. She's finished Kat Zingano with that kick to the eye in the last fight. Although it was a weird circumstance, it was a legal strike. She threw a kick, and her toe went in Zingano's eye, and that's how the fight ended. But she's got some solid boxing. She throws with some ill intent. She throws in combos sometimes, and her defense definitely suffers. She gets sloppy, and she was getting tagged with some counter punches versus Charmaine Tweet when they fought. But Spencer has no boxing. She's not going to be counter-punching shit. And Megan Anderson's going to have a solid 6 inches of reach, a 6 inches of height and reach advantage too. Megan Anderson is going to tower over Felicia Spencer. Now, the one area where this fight gets interesting is that Anderson's takedown defense and her ground game sucks. Quite frankly, it sucks. Holly Holm, a lifetime striker, boxer, kickboxer, was able to completely out-grapple Anderson easily. Holly Holm was like, why even make a competitive fight on the feet with this girl if I have way better takedowns, way better top control? And Holly Holm was looking like Khabib Nurmagomedov out there versus Megan Anderson. She was taking her down with, body locks, with single legs, with double legs. Anderson has just got a big, long, lanky frame, and it just doesn't look like her frame is built to wrestle at all. She looked like she didn't have much balance. It looked like she didn't have much sprawl. She did not look like she had spent too much time wrestling at all. Now, that fight was a while ago. I think it was at UFC 225, so it was, almost a year ago. She was fighting Kat Zingano, who was going to, relentless wrestler who was definitely going to try and take her down, and now she's fighting another grappler in Spencer. So I got to trust that for the past 11 months, Anderson's been training her takedown defense nonstop. I don't expect that to be the case, but I expect her to improve it a little bit. And I'm just unimpressed enough with Spencer that I don't think that she'll be able to get the takedowns in this fight. I think that Anderson will be able to keep it standing, and I think that she will be able to land the harder, cleaner strikes all fight for however long it lasts. I honestly think that Anderson has a good chance at finishing Felicia Spencer on the feet with some punches and some kicks in this fight. So I think that Spencer will be looking for the takedown. I don't think that she'll get Anderson down. If she does get her down in round one, I don't see Spencer finishing it. I see, Anderson being able to stuff the takedowns rounds 2 or 3 and, eventually outstrike Spencer. But, there's a slight chance Spencer gets the takedown in all 3 rounds and, wins a decision or possibly gets a submission in this one. But I really don't see that having too good of a chance at happening. I honestly think that Spencer maybe has a 20% at winning a decision, 10% at getting a submission, and then maybe Anderson has a good 30% at getting a decision, and then Anderson has, I'd say, a 40% chance of getting a finish in this one. So I'm really leaning Anderson in this one. I think that she'll get the finish via knockout in this one. Next fight is in the middleweight division. We got Antonio Carlos Jr., who is 10-2, taking on Ian Heinisch, who is 12-1. The opening betting line for this one was ACJ at -232, Ian Heinisch at +170. Right now, we are seeing Antonio Carlos Jr. at -165 to Ian Heinisch +145. So line margins have tightened up. There's 2-way action coming in on this fight. It's a really close fight, and I'm really looking forward to this one. I think this is probably my second favorite matchup on the card. We got Antonio Carlos Jr., another well-accomplished jiu-jitsu black belt, another one of those guys who has, world championships in jiu-jitsu. I think world champion brown belt level, and then I think he got, I believe, bronze medal in the black belt division when he competed in the worlds. So just an incredible submission artist here. He's got really good rear naked chokes. He's won, I think, the past 3 of his fights by rear naked choke, although they're over some lower level competition. Eric Spicely is a black belt of his own right, but not the greatest MMA fighter. Jack Marshman barely grapples, and then his most recent fight, who the fuck was that against? Let's see. Antonio Carlos Jr. most recent win was over Tim Boetsch, another guy who's been notorious for bad submission defense his entire career. So, I don't hold too many of his wins too highly. The fight that I look at a lot is the Marvin Vettori fight. Man, he struggled with Marvin Vettori. Marvin Vettori was, I think that was, it might have been his UFC debut. He was no, it wasn't. It was his second fight in the UFC. But he was real green at the time. He was 23 years old, and he presented a lot of problems for Antonio Carlos Jr. in that fight. He was hard to take down. He got up off of his feet, and he actually reversed the takedown in round 2 and ended up on top and started smashing ground and pound with Antonio Carlos Jr. Man, so Antonio Carlos Jr. does have some decent takedowns. He's good in round 1 at getting the takedown, but if he does not get the takedown in round 1, it's hard for him to get it in round 2. Now, he did eventually get the takedown in round 3 and grind out a decision against Marvin Vettori in that fight, winning rounds 1 and 3. But Vettori, was beating him bad in round 2, had him on his back and was smashing him with some ground and pound, all because he was just, had some good takedown defense. And that was a 23-year-old Vettori, an Italian fighter, a guy who really was just a striker primarily throughout his career. And Vettori was able to provide a tough fight for Carlos Jr. in that fight. Now, getting over to Ian Heinisch. Ian Heinisch made his UFC debut on a week's notice versus Cesar Mutante Pereira. And, man, that fight was just so impressive. It was not the smartest fight that he could have fought. He did go for a lot of submissions on a third-degree black belt in Mutante. But, I thought he won the fight, man. Obviously, he won the decision, and I think that those submission attempts helped him win the fight. he showed that he was not afraid of the grappling of Mutanche. Most guys are scared to engage with Mutanche on the ground. Mutanche has some really good wins. Thiago Santos, he tapped out Jack Hermanson. I think that Mutanche has got better wins than Antonio Carlos Jr. Carlos Jr., I think, has, mostly just been beating the lower level guys, like I mentioned, Boach, Marshman, Spicely, Vittori, while Mutanche actually had some really good wins. So Ian Heinisch has really impressed me in that fight. His cardio looked good. He was, attacking on the ground. His offensive grappling looked good. He was hitting his own takedowns on Mutanche. He dropped Mutanche with a right hook in round 2. He had good cardio, good output pace in round 3. I honestly thought Ian Heinisch won that fight like 30-27. I thought that he was winning round 1. He was really close to finishing that armbar in round 1 as well. That's why I gave Heinisch the first round. He dropped Mutanche in round 2, and then he dominated round 3. So, that performance was just so impressive. But coming here on a week's notice against an established UFC veteran like Mutanche, an established black belt like Mutanche, and then go in there and out-grapple him and out-strike him and just, totally beat him down. Just such an impressive performance from Heinisch. I'm still riding high on the guy, especially with his, his story of everything of him, being in Rikers Island and everything. And he eventually he did have his last fight canceled on fight day versus Tom Bree, so he's getting back in here versus Carlos Jr. I expect him to be fiending for a fight at this point. I think the dude is is just an animal. He has no fears, and you saw that in the Mutanche fight. He was willingly engaging with the grappling in that 3rd degree black belt in Cesar Pereira. So. On the feet, I think that this one will be really close. I think that Heinisch will actually have the better striking on the feet. I think that Antonio Carlos Jr. will probably get Heinisch down, but I think that Heinisch will stay solid defensively. I don't think he'll get tapped out, and I think that he'll be able to get back up to his feet. Then in rounds 2, I think Heinisch will start stuffing the takedowns. He'll start winning the fight, and in round 3, I think it'll come down to either guy and who has the better cardio. And I think that Ian Heinisch will. Ian Heinisch looked great in round 3 versus Mutanche, while Antonio Carlos Jr. lost. Well, he did get knocked out in round 3 versus Daniel Kelly not that long ago, but he was gasping for air against Marvin Vittori in round 3 of that fight. He did grind out that decision. That was the last time we saw him in round 3, though, and his cardio looked bad. He looked like he was sweating that decision and everything. So I think that if it comes down to round 3, which I think it will, it'll be 1-1 going into the 3rd. I think the Heinisch, his cardio will lead him to be the more active striker. He'll be stuffing the takedowns and landing the better shots in round 3, and I think the Heinisch will win a decision in this one. Now, Antonio Carlos Jr. does have the ability to end this fight at any moment with that submission, but as long as Heinisch isn't as reckless as he was last fight, jumping guillotine and going arm bars and all types of crazy shit versus like he did versus Mutanche. As long as he does not do that against Antonio Carlos Jr., I think he will definitely win this fight. But you really can't count on Heinisch to do that. He's a madman. He will probably do some reckless stuff that will make you question his fight IQ. But that's what won him that last fight, was being reckless and not having any fears. So I'd say don't switch up the game plan. Although Heinisch's only loss of his career has come by arm triangle to Marcus Perez when he got reckless on the ground. So Heinisch's got to look out for that dangerous submission threat of Carlos Jr., but I think that he will avoid the submission, and I think the Heinisch will win a decision. So Heinisch as a plus 145 dog, I think there's some value on that, and probably some value on his decision line as well. Let's take a look at what that line is. They're plus 390, so definitely some value on the decision of Ian Heinisch there. Next fight takes place in the welterweight division. This is our co-main event of the evening. We got Vicente Luque, who is 14-6-1, taking on Derek Krantz, who is 24-10. Now, the opening betting line for this one was Vicente Luque, the minus 515 favorite, to Derek Krantz at plus 345. Right now, we are seeing Luque minus 700 to Derek Krantz at plus 500. So Luque opened as the 5-1 favorite in this one, and people have since bet him down to a 7-1 favorite, and I think it's pretty rightfully so. Derek Krantz is getting a tough task in his UFC debut in this one. Pretty much the toughest task you could really ask for. Actually, it seems like they've promoted Carlos Jr. to Ian Heinisch as main event, while this fight's been downgraded a little bit on the card, but. I didn't know that before I started recording, so so be it. So Vicente Luque, is a dangerous striker, man. He's got power in both hands. He's got real good boxing, and he's got good submissions as well. He likes to hurt you on the feet and then snatching up a submission. But his last fight against Barberena, man, was a close fight. He was it was. I think that he was on his way to losing that fight. I thought that Luque won round 1 of that fight. He was outstriking Barberena early. He was landing some big punches, and then he, I think that he was looking for the knockout and expecting to get the knockout early, like he does against a lot of opponents. But Barberena is a zombie, and he can take a punch. And he had a little bit of an adrenaline dump, and Barberena came back and eventually dropped Luque in round 2 of that fight. He did quickly recover from that. He almost he took Barberena's back and almost got the rear naked choke shortly after he got dropped. But Barberena once again escaped. Luque again attacked a Dawson submission, and then again Barberena escaped. And then Barberena was landing some heavy ground and pound to close out that second round. So I gave Barberena the second round, and then Barberena was just out-voluming, being the more active, aggressive fighter in round 3, beating Luque in round 3 before Luque eventually poured it on in the last 30 seconds, rocked Barberena with some punches and knees, and eventually got the finish in the last 10 seconds, man. Just so, although Luque looked a little shaky in that, although he got dropped, although he was on his way to losing, he dug fucking deep in the last 30 seconds of that fight, chased the finish, and got it. He knew he was down. He knew that he could lose this fight on the scorecards, so he decided to lay it all out there, and that's exactly what he did, and he got the finish, not having to leave it in the hands of the judges. So, really impressive performance from Luque. Although he was losing and was, had to dig deep, he still knew when to turn it on. He knew when to, turn up the heat, and he got the finish. So you really can't knock that fight too much. He looked, his defense didn't look the best. His cardio didn't look the best. His chin didn't look too good. But man, that finish, man, it almost erased all of that negative from earlier in the fight. Because Barberena is a zombie, man. He gives hard guys, or he gives good guys fights all the time. He's constantly a big underdog to powerful strikers like Warlley Alves and whatnot. Sage Northcutt, not that he's a powerful striker, and he constantly comes through and gives them a tough fight. So you can never count Barberena out. So getting over to Derek Krantz, he definitely has knockout power in his hands. He absolutely, smashed his last opponent with some punches. And he's fought some UFC guys in his career before. He's fought Poirier. He's fought Charles Byrd. He's fought Alex Morono. He actually picked up a victory over Charles Byrd. Exploited that ground game of Charles Byrd like some guys in the UFC has. Took him down, took his back, and rear naked choked him. He also has some Vasteras submissions. He has a real nice Von Flue choke I saw some video of. He's got definitely a solid ground game. And he's got some solid power on the feet, too. So he's definitely a well-rounded fighter. But he's just, he's not going to be on Luque's level. He's going to, he's just getting a really tough debut in this one. He punched his ticket to the UFC, though. He got in here into the promotion on a short notice fight. He knows that the odds are probably stacked against him in this fight, but he's still coming in here, and he's probably going to throw down. But I think that Luque will be better on the feet. He'll be better on the ground, and I think that Luque will win this fight no matter where it goes. But I expect Luque to be more cautious in this one. I don't think he'll come out swinging for the fences like he does in his past most recent fights. I think that he will, be weary that he almost lost that last fight to Barberena, and he will probably play this one safe, especially it being a new opponent on a week's notice. So I expect Luque to win via decision. Moving on to the main event of the evening, we have Rafael dos Anjos, who is 28-11, taking on Kevin Lee, who is 17-4. The opening betting line for this one was Kevin Lee, the favorite, at -135 to Rafael dos Anjos at -105. Right now, over on 5 Dimes, we are seeing Rafael dos Anjos minus 115 to Kevin Lee at minus 105. So line margins have tightened up. There's definitely two-way action coming in on this fight. It's a real close fight. We got Kevin Lee moving up to welterweight, making his debut at that division, and we got the former lightweight champion Rafael dos Anjos looking to bounce back from a couple losses via decision, to 5-round losses to Colby Covington and to Kamaru Usman. Rafael dos Anjos has notoriously struggled with pressure wrestlers. Most of the guys in his career he has lost to have been wrestlers. Jeremy Stevens, Clay Guida, Gleison Tibau, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Eddie Alvarez, Tony Ferguson, Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman. Literally all 8 of those guys are wrestlers. So, he does have a few losses to other guys, but for the most part, it's pressure wrestlers that really give Rafael dos Anjos, a run for his money. He has beaten a few wrestlers, no doubt. Robbie Lawler, Benson Henderson, both those guys have very solid wrestling pedigrees. Even Don Cerrone has good wrestling. So it's not like it's the complete Achilles heel of Rafael dos Anjos. But he has taken on Kevin Lee, who has a great wrestling pedigree of his own. I don't really know exactly what his credentials are, but I know he has great takedowns, great top control, good back takes, good rear naked chokes. Rear naked choke is definitely his biggest weapon. Most of his high level wins, I believe, have come via rear naked choke. He got Chiesa with it, Trinaldo, Magomed Mustafayev. A lot of good guys, and then he also picked up his most impressive victory has to be that absolute thrashing of Edson Barbosa, that 5-round beating, or well, I guess a 4-round beating. When he lost a round in that fight, but he was just relentless with the takedown, the top pressure, and the ground and pound, and just smashed Edson Barbosa in that fight viciously. But Kevin Lee has had his fair share of low IQ moments in the UFC. Most recently, his fight against Ally Quinson. Man, the game plan of that fight that Lee tried to execute was just so fucking dumb, man. He lost himself that fight so clearly. Lee's got some of the best wrestling and top pressure and submissions in the division, and then he's going out there and trying to strike versus Ally Quinson, who's the better boxer. He was just cleanly outstruck from the moment that fight started. Kevin Lee did win, I think, rounds maybe 2 and 3 of that fight. I think one of those was even close. I think round 2 was really close. Lee, the only one that Lee really dominantly won was round 3. He got the body triangle. He took the back of Ally Quinton, but he gassed his legs out with that body triangle. He wasn't able to get the finish, and then he was tired in rounds 4 and 5 of that fight, and Ally Quinton took over late and put a beating on Kevin Lee in rounds 4 and 5 of that fight. Was pretty much close to stopping Kevin Lee in round 5 of that fight. Very questionable game plan from Kevin Lee in that fight. He was trying to strike way too much. He was trying to look like a striker, trying to look like something he was not out there. But Ally Quinton, showed him what's what and outboxed him clean in that fight. So if Kevin Lee tries to implement that same game plan and try to outstrike Rafael dos Anjos, I think he's going to lose this fight pretty clearly. I think that Dos Anjos is the much better striker. He's just throughout his entire career, Rafael dos Anjos has had really good striking, and especially the past 5 years has just brought his striking to a whole nother level. Finishing Cerrone, he put on that masterclass performance versus Pettis and Diaz with the leg kicks and the pressure. And then he outstruck Robbie Lawler for most of their fight. He smashed Neil Magny with a leg kick, and then hit him with some top pressure, and then eventually got the submission in that one. Don't forget Rafael dos Anjos is I think a 5th degree black belt or something like that. One of the highest credentialed black belts on the roster. So I think that Kevin Lee is going to have a hard time getting off his bread and butter of the rear naked choke in this fight. I really don't see him submitting Rafael dos Anjos. I don't think Rafael dos Anjos has ever been submitted, if I'm correct. Never been submitted in his career, so I don't see Kevin Lee being the first man to do it. I see Kevin Lee trying to implement that same game plan that Colby Covington and Usman did, where you push them against the fence and you stall them out and you look for the takedown, look for the top pressure. Usman had much more success than Colby Covington did. Colby did push him against the cage for a long time in that fight and did get a few takedowns, but did not have nearly the amount of top pressure or ground and pound that Usman did. The Colby Covington fight was actually a lot closer than people remember it. Dos Anjos was always, in that fight. It seemed like Colby had his number early. It seemed like Colby was putting on the pace. He was executing his game plan. He was, winning the fight from, I thought from the moment the fight started. But, I guess you could give Colby or RDA round 1. You could definitely give him round 4. So, that's a 48-47 decision. That's not that wide of a decision. So, Usman definitely beat him bad, though. Usman beat him, 50-45, maybe even more than that. It's just he really Rafael dos Anjos really struggled with the movement. He really couldn't circle around the cage much. He was not, using his footwork as well as he could. He did a decent job stuffing the takedowns. He made him work. He made Usman work for every one. He was digging underhooks and fighting to get back up to his feet in every one. He actually did get back up to his feet from a few of those takedowns from Usman, but Usman was able to get him down in pretty much every round. He really just broke RDA with the pressure, with the wrestling. RDA was, like I said, able to get back up to his feet a few times, but really did not have pretty much no success in that fight. But Colby and Usman are natural 170ers. Those guys are big guys. They probably weigh 190 in the cage that night, while RDA is a guy who has fought at lightweight for most of his career and has only recently moved up to welterweight. So I think that he's going to be fighting a guy who's close to his size this time in Kevin Lee. Again, a former lightweight, and I think that it's going to be a much closer fight. I think Kevin Lee's cardio is pretty susceptible. We really haven't seen him show, the Barboza fight, he showed good cardio, but he was in control of that fight the whole time. We've never really seen him in a back and forth type of fight where he showed good cardio. The back and forth type of fight, he did have a 5-rounder against Iaquinta. His cardio looked shit in that fight. He gassed out in round 4 and got beat off round 4 and 5 of that fight. So you got to think that RDA will have the better cardio in there. You got to think RDA will have the better striking. I think that, RDA is the better overall, better MMA fighter, but man, he's getting up there in age. You cannot ignore RDA's miles. He's 34 years old. He's had 40 MMA fights. He's had 25 UFC fights. He's been in the UFC for, over 10 years now. He's been in the UFC since November of 2008, so 11 years in the UFC. Does he have one more run left in him? He did have those 2 losses at lightweight, and he bounced back with 3 wins at welterweight over great competition. But his back's against the wall. He's facing 2 losses. Does he have one more resurgence in him to come back here and get this comeback victory over Kevin Lee? It's a big question, but I think that he does. I think that he's going to be game. I think that I favor Rafael dos Anjos in this fight. He's fought at welterweight before. I think he's shown the better cardio. I think that he's facing a little bit of a step down in competition in this one. I think he's fought better wrestlers, better pressure fighters recently, and I think that he's going to be, the foot is going to be let off the gas a little bit in this one facing Kevin Lee. So I think that we'll start to see that better RDA where he's going to be striking at range. He's going to be leg kicking. He's going to be stuffing the takedowns of RDA of Lee, and maybe even ending up on top in a grappling exchange, showing off that black belt he's got, that great ground game that RDA has in his back pocket that he rarely shows. But it's going to be a good fight, man. I think that if Kevin Lee has the right game plan and he comes in here with that pressure, that push against the cage, the top pressure, the ground and pound, the look for submissions, I think that he will win the fight. But if he tries to strike, if he tries to prove that he can strike with RDA, or if he does not come in here with the best game plan and in the best of shape, I think that RDA will win the fight. And I think that the latter option that I just said about Lee trying to strike a little too much and giving RDA a chance to win this fight. I think that's the more likely scenario. So I'm going to go with Rafael dos Anjos to win this fight via 48-47 decision. So that's going to do it for the UFC Rochester preview. We got 13 fights going down in Rochester, New York this Saturday night, starting things off with 7 prelim fights at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and then 6-fight main card at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that being said, we're just going to quickly recap the UFC 237 pay-per-view that went down this past weekend. It was a pretty crazy card. I'll give you that. It had its fair share of finishes and good fights. In the predictions realm of things, I went 6-6. So out of the 12 fights, I got half of them wrong. So did not do too good. Starting things off, Viviane Araújo put on an incredible performance, getting a knockout over Talita Bernardo. Short notice, 5 days notice, up 20 pounds in weight, UFC debut, and Araújo comes in here and knocks out Bernardo. One of the most impressive debuts, of the past 5 years, that I've ever seen. One of the most impressive debuts ever from a fighter in Viviane Araújo. Raoni Barcelos finished Carlos Huachin Quiros via ground and pound TKO in that one. I thought Huachin looked good, honestly, in round 1 of that fight. He was definitely game. Definitely didn't regret some stabs on his TKO line. Luana Carolina outstruck Cachoeira to a decision. She looked really good in that fight. It was a pretty fun fight, honestly. A fun lower-level women's fight. Clay Guida defeated BJ Penn unanimous decision. BJ Penn didn't look that bad, honestly. I think that on Guida, even though Guida won, Guida looked worse than BJ Penn. He was, Guida let off took his foot off the gas in this one. He had a little too much respect for BJ Penn, and he did not chase the finish at all. Warlley Alves defeated Moraes via knockout. He, just outstruck Moraes all fight. Got that one wrong. Thought Moraes was going to lay and pray for a victory in that one. Moises got the decision victory in that one. I think I predicted that one correctly. I thought that, he would be the better, he would have that ground game to mix up, and he would just be the better MMA fighter. That's true. I think I did pick Spann to win against Nogueira. He got the knockout early in that fight. Aldana had a actually somewhat competitive fight with Correa. Aldana won round 1. Correa came back and won round 2. And then in round 3, Aldana was eventually able to snatch up the armbar to get the victory in that one. But I was sweating the scorecards a little bit in that one. Staropoli looked pretty good against Alves, just out-voluming him into a decision. Got that one wrong. Volkanovski, out-voluming Aldo to a decision. Bad decision in that one, 30-27. I gave Aldo rounds 1 and 2 of that fight. A little bit biased for Aldo, obviously. I was live betting him, and, he's one of my favorite fighters ever. But I honestly thought that Aldo was edging that fight early, but the judges obviously disagreed. Cannonier took Silva out of there with just attacking an inside leg kick, and eventually TKO'd Silva due to leg injury. Then Namajunas came out there looking excellent against Andrade, was outboxing her easily through the first round or 2 of this fight. Actually dropped her in round 1 with a knee, but then Andrade, just picked her up and slammed her on her head for the knockout slam victory. Got the last 4 fights of the evening all wrong in that one. So like I said, 6 for 6 on predictions in that pay-per-view. The whole main card went pretty differently than I expected, but regardless, some good fights from Brazil. And that's going to do it for the podcast this week. This has been episode 61 of the Martian MMA podcast. I'm sorry if my voice has been a little hoarse. My allergies are pretty bad right now, but we still got through the program. And we're going to enjoy the fights this Saturday night in Rochester, New York. So I'll see you all before UFC 238. We got a couple weeks off. I don't think there's any fights for the next couple weeks, so we'll see you in a few weeks. Peace.